So what happens when you're raised in a home where it's like, do as I say, not as I do, because I said so, you made me spank you. If you hadn't done that thing, I wouldn't have done that to you. Um, this is how we see power playing out in the world.
Welcome to Parenting Teens Today with Jessie LeBeau.
We have the amazing, the incredible, the one and only, the Kiva Schuler, if you will. And she has done a lot of amazing things. And instead of me trying to explain it all, I'm just going to kind of ask her one by one. So the first thing that I want to know is, how did you get started in all of this? I can't imagine when you were a little girl, you're like, I'm going to grow up and I'm going to be a parenting expert. I'm going to help train all these parent coaches. What was your dream? What was your, when you were a
Funny
kid?
story is looking back, it actually does root to my childhood. I always loved children. I have a half brother from my dad's second marriage who's 7 years younger than me. And I started working in his daycare center when I was probably like 9 or 10 years old. And I remember being in the 8-year-old classroom and all these kids are piled on me and thinking to myself, I love this. Like, I
Wow.
love children. And I had this really interesting perspective as a kid, especially as I got into my teen years, because I lived in two homes, my mom's house and my dad's house. My mom, like 1980s powerhouse, as a latchkey kid, she believed in me, loved me, would have done anything for me, and wasn't very present because that was just it was the circumstances. My dad's second wife was very punitive. And so I had this bird's eye view of watching my brother be parented with Tabasco and soap in his mouth, being locked in the bathroom for an hour for doing something that was cute 2 days before, being forced to eat all his food, even if he was like gagging on it. And I could just watch his little spirit just kind of like deflate out of him. And so I did have this profound moment that when I was around 16 and he was being punished, and I just thought to myself, I'm going to do better. When I become a parent, I will do whatever it takes to do it well. So I studied psychology. I specialized in family systems. Like, it's always been a thread. But then I had my own kids, Jesse, and we all think we're going to be perfect parents before we have children. And so that was kind of the click for me. Like, wait a second, it's not their behavior that actually needs to change; it's mine.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And we're joined by King Milo here. He's out fighting the birds right now. You may have heard him. He's big time right now. So
He
it's
looks
kind of
very
like you had like almost like the rich dad, poor dad of parenting, of like two different styles, and then you were
yeah.
able to see it firsthand in both of your homes. Is that fair to
Yeah,
say?
that's a great analogy. I'm going to steal that.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty good. I was like, okay, I see where this is going here.
Yeah.
And so for you, and I think for every parent, once you actually have the kids, it's a whole different ball game. So what was kind of the mindset shift that you saw when you actually had to live it rather than just express it and give your opinions on it, but actually be in the game?
I mean, at that time, I was already a life coach. I had worked in the financial markets. And so, my coaching career really started off in a very different direction. I had no intention of parenting being such a focus for me. So there was a couple, I mean, there's so many stories I could tell you. My kids are 17 and 19 now. So we've been at this for a while. But then when they
Yeah.
were little, um, very embarrassing to admit, but I used to love the super nanny. It would make me feel so much better about my own
Okay.
parenting. And so I tried the whole super nanny timeout thing. My son is very strong-willed. When I was pregnant with him, like, he'd kick his leg out, I'd push it back in. It's been that way for the last 19 years. And there was one day I put him in timeout, and I don't know if you know her formula, but it was like they have to sit on the step for as many minutes as is their age, and then they have to apologize. And if they don't apologize, then they need to repeat, right? Like rinse and repeat until you break them into apologizing. And I kid you not, my 4-year-old son, Miles, was on that step for well over an hour. That's how much I tried. And by the end of it, he would not look at me. He was not going to capitulate. I mean, he is just like, don't, you can't make me. And I was like, this is not it. Like, this is not living into that promise that I made myself. I thought there had to be a better way. And so I had a podcast at the time. This is like way back in the day. And I just started being curious. I got to interview Pope Bronson and Alfie Kohn and Marshall Rosenberg. Like, I just sort of immersed myself in this world of what does conscious, peaceful, intentional parenting look like. And then, like, this light bulb went off for me that in every other area of our life, when we want to get better at something, we get an education and we get mentorship or coaching. And this was 2011. Like, coaching was barely an accepted career at that point. Parent coaching was like, people are like, what? You're going to like tell parents how to raise their kids? I'm like, no, no, no. That's not what coaches do.
Yeah.
We're going to help them decide what kind of parents they want to be and then coach them to live into that intention. And of course, we've come so far since then. We have an amazing curriculum. Our students are pediatricians and therapists and educators. And so we have a very high bar of education that we meet for our students. But at the end of the day, I think that things are changing and people are starting to recognize that just because I don't know how to parent naturally doesn't mean I'm a bad person. And that what actually comes naturally largely stems from the early relational experiences that we had with our caregivers, and theirs was from their caregivers. And so if we want to break these cycles of harm, emotional wounding, trauma, disconnection, right? Kids today are like checking out of the relationships that they have with their parents, not because they're not good kids, but because we aren't able to meet the emotional and relational needs that have evolved that our children now expect us to be able to meet. And so coaching really for me was like the obvious solution for a very painful experience that so many parents have.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's so funny. And I've always thought this that in order to do just about anything, you need some type of certification, you need some type of training, you need to go get your permit before you can drive a car, like all of these
Right.
things. But the most important thing, and everyone always says that the most important job is being a mom, is being a dad, right? We all believe that and we all say that, but you don't need any level of education. You don't need any level of training. In many cases, it actually came from maybe a reckless, bad decision making that put yourself in this situation. Not in all cases, but in order to be a parent, it's like, well, there should be some type of training. And so, for me, as a sports background, coaches makes all kinds of sense. We have coaches for everything. The best people in the planet, whether it's Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant, they had coaches. So
Yeah.
why wouldn't we do the same thing for this area of our lives that is so important? And like you said, most of it you're just pulling from your parents or your grandparents, whoever raised you, and you're like, well, I think that was really bad, so I'll just try to do the opposite. Or that seemed
Right.
pretty okay, so maybe I'll try to do that too. So
Yeah.
that to me makes so much sense. And I've always thought that of like, how come we don't have more people? Which leads
Yeah.
me to the thing that I was checking out earlier before we hopped on here. And you said something that I totally love. And it's basically, I want to hear it in your own words, but not doing as I say, but doing as I do. As the parent, we have to lead by our example, and the kids are mirroring and patterning us. What are all of your thoughts on that? Because that's something that I agree with so much.
I mean, I wrote a whole book about that. You can go get it. It's called The Peaceful Parenting Revolution. So, to briefly summarize,
Yeah, break down
um,
the book real quick for us, would you?
yeah, I mean, so children have 10 times more mirror neurons in their brains than adults. That is for a very smart reason, right? When children come into the world, they are blank slates. Their little brains, like if we held up a pen and said this is a cup for 10 years, our child will believe that this is a cup, right? What we tell them, what we demonstrate becomes their learned behavior. And so, another thing that just always struck me as wild is I found quotes going back to like 1,000 BC that are like, the kids these days, they're so this, they're so that, they're rude, they're spoiled, they're entitled. And where do they learn that from? Right? I often say that I make the case for parent coaching not by looking at children, but by looking at adults and the way
Mm,
that we express our needs, the way that we handle conflict, the way that we feel judgy towards people who aren't like us, the way that we get really challenged when someone has a different worldview than us. Our children model our behavior. And so the best path to raising children to adopt the behaviors and values and morality and integrity that you hope for them to have is to actually be those things. Now, you're up against a lifetime of fears, limiting beliefs, perspectives, right? We have assumptions about people's behaviors. We feel things, and then rather than feeling them, we spin up a whole narrative in our monkey brain about why we're feeling this thing and how this person made me feel this way. So it's hard work, but I think it's adults' work to do, and that maybe we can be the generation of parents who says, wait a second, maybe it's not my child's job to change their behavior so that I feel better. It is my job to shift my behavior to be able to guide and mentor and lead them to reach their potential, to have fulfilling lives, to be of service, to use their voice in the face of injustice, all the things we expect children to do, but then we're screaming at them.
yeah, makes it tough. It makes it tough when you lead by that. But like you said, it's years and years of this is what I experienced and this is what I know, and they haven't had that kind of training. And you guys have trained how many? It was like over 2,000
Up to
in your
2,000. We have coaches in 56 countries. And Jesse, I feel like we're just scratching the tippity tip of the iceberg. There are 60 million parents here in the US alone. I
yeah,
have a dream that someday having a parent coach will be as common as having a pediatrician. A
yeah,
lot of what causes conflict between parents and children is that parents have unrealistic, because they don't know, right? Like they're not doing anything wrong, but an expectation of, say, a toddler to remember the rules from last week, or an expectation of a
mhm,
teenager whose brain is literally rewiring every synapse between the ages of roughly 14 and 16 to 24 or 26 years old, that they should be as responsible as an adult, that they should have the same kind of memory recall. And so when parents have a baseline education of emotional intelligence, childhood development, nonviolent communication, values led leadership, now we can meet the child where they are, right? Perhaps they are neurodiverse. Perhaps, like kids are not a monolith, right? Like they're all different. And so then we're actually able to deal with our own triggers, our own reactivity ourselves, and actually use our more assertive parenting moments for things that really matter, which quite often is not when our 4-year-old and 6-year-old are bickering in the back seat. We can just like chill.
yeah, 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 yeah. So for these parents that you are impacting all over the world with the
Mhm.
Jai Institute of Parenting, for parenting, where, like, can you give me like some of the success stories that you hear back that makes it so worth it for you? Because a lot of
I mean,
people who are listening to this are parents, particularly moms. And
yeah.
so if they're looking for how they can reconnect, whether it's their relationship with their child or deal with this emotional regulation or bad behavior, like what's some of the feedback that you hear consistently from the people who do your institute?
It makes me cry. I read our Google reviews every Monday morning. It's how I get myself fired up for the
Oh,
week.
wow.
The stories are profound, from mothers, parents of young children who are not yelling, are more patient, are more calm, are having fun with their kids when they're little. We've had parents of adult children come through Jai who have had disconnection, like a very surface level relationship with their adult children, being able to repair years and years of conflict and discord. Um, some of my favorite stories are, from people who are working with children, right? Educators or pediatricians whose, the kids that they care about, they love, are struggling so much, and they have the same light bulb as me. Like, wait a second, I can have my 45-minute therapy session with this child, and then they're going to go home and just experience the same thing and over. Let me work with the parents. And then lo and behold, we give parents these tools, and people be like, it's amazing. My daughter didn't lock herself in the room yesterday. She actually asked me how my day was. Well, we didn't do anything that was at all guised in behavior modification for children. When parents shift, children shift. And then, of course, the stories of like people going out and building businesses, big and small. I mean, some of our, I'm really proud to say that some of the biggest influencers in the gentle parenting and peaceful parenting space are JAI graduates, proud JAI graduates. So just seeing the work go out into the world and impact, it's like, it's
Pretty
crazy.
amazing, huh? And it's been
Yeah.
going for how long? How long have you been doing this?
13 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. Yeah, it is so interesting, and that's something because I go and speak in a lot of schools, so I'm doing that 3 or 4 times a month all over the country, and kids get excited and they're fired up and motivated, but then the thing that has been a frustration for me over the years is how many of them actually follow through on it, and they really need someone who can guide them and coach them, and
Yeah.
and a lot of times it can be like they're going 3 steps forward and then they go back to a home environment that's toxic that doesn't have this figured out, and then they're taking that 2 steps back. So that is
Yeah.
just something that it resonates so well with me and my experience out there, boots on the ground too, of like you gotta
Yeah.
do it in the home and it starts with you.
Yeah. I mean, I
So
guess what I would love to say to that, um, I have two teenagers who I adore. They're amazing. It's not perfect for me either. I hear what you're saying, and I can recognize that happening with my own children. And so it's not that this is a magic pill, right? It's not that it's like if you become more grounded, if you become a better communicator, if you become your child's mentor, guide, coach, whatever you want to say, it doesn't mean it's all going to go well. It's not. Children are children. They're going
yeah,
to do stupid things. They're going to not follow through on their commitments. But we're able to stay with them as they start to develop that skill set, um, and they trust us.
yeah,
Yeah,
trust is pretty important, huh?
huge, life saving. I mean, literally, as our children get car keys and access to substances and a lot more freedom and independence, I think trust between parents and children literally saves lives. And it is
Mm.
the most valuable asset, I believe, to focus on in the relationship that you cultivate with your children. Trust is everything.
How can a parent repair trust once it's been broken? That's something I hear a
Great.
lot from parents.
Yeah. So, um, I won't curse on this show, but sometimes I say you got to eat the bleep sandwich,
Okay.
right? Like, so the thing is, this is where it gets tricky. So if we did not grow up in an environment where adults ever demonstrated remorse or responsibility for their part in whatever took place, what that develops is kind of this idea that adults cannot apologize or humbly come to their children willing to take full responsibility, even though the child had a part to play too, because it would mean that there is an abdication of power, right? So what happens when you're raised in a home where it's like, do as I say, not as I do, because I said so, you made me spank you. If you hadn't done that thing, I wouldn't have done that to you. um, this is how we see power playing out in the world. And now we're the one in power, and we've been conditioned to believe that we have to maintain that power regardless of its impact on the relationship with our child. And so this is why with JAI, it's always our work first, right? So if I was
Mm.
speaking to someone who said that, I might have them do a little thinking about their relationship to power and their fears about what might go wrong if they said to their child, I was thinking about our relationship and I'm really hurting about the pain that I've caused you. And I would truly like to hear what it's been like for you to have me as your mom. Now that is so vulnerable, right? Like we are like literally exposing, we're like opening our ribs and saying, here's my heart, oh beloved child of mine, stick some knives in it,
Yeah.
proverbially speaking. Sorry,
Yeah.
that was violent.
Yeah.
But it can be so painful. So then we have to be willing to hold and sit with that pain to receive it from our child. And that may not happen overnight, right? If a child has evidence that we don't trust them built up over years, it is going to take some time for them to trust us.
Yeah.
And especially with older children, it might take 6 months, it might take a year, but this is our kid. And so, feeling this ability to hear our children and really let it in and not defend and not, contradict and just say, thank you. What else? I
Hmm.
imagine that was really hard. Oh, my heart is hurting that I did that to you. I'm so sorry. There's no child who will not respond well to that at some point, because even as adult children, let's admit it, there is nothing more that we want from our parents than to be seen, heard, and loved.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. Easier said than done. Like you said, it doesn't happen overnight, but what a place to work towards. And I love that everything comes back to starting with yourself. That really is the key to it all. If you want to help them, you want to help the relationship, you got to start with yourself. And maybe that means you got to eat that sandwich that you're talking about and being like, how have I fallen short? And I apologize for those things. And I see that those are the most powerful tools is when you actually mess up. You don't want to
Yeah.
mess up. We don't encourage anyone to like just make all these mistakes and then have a vulnerable moment about it. We'd rather not do that. But when you do, use it as a tool to actually be a learning thing. Like, look, even I struggle with this. Look, even I'm having a hard time, and I want to do better, and because I love you and I care about you, and I also love myself and want to be the best version that I can be.
How would the world be different if we normalized human messiness? Right? Like every
Yeah.
human being is going to have bad days. We're tired, we're sick, we're overwhelmed, we're exhausted. Somebody yelled at us at work, somebody cut us off on the road. We're not here to just be like rainbows and unicorns, because then we're showing our kids, because remember, they do as we do, not as we say, that they are only acceptable and lovable and worthy when everything is going well. And so
Mm.
I tend to believe, like, let's make our mistakes and our messes in front of our children visible, talk our walk, right? Like,
Mm.
I did not have my best day yesterday. That was not about you. Let me share what happened. And next time I want to try and do better. What ideas do you have that could support me to not, lose my cool when I walk into the house after work? Kids love to be a part of the solution.
Yeah.
Um, but I think more importantly, what that does for them is it demonstrates to them that we still have self-worth, that we can validate ourselves even when we make mistakes as parents, which means, guess what? They can too.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to dive into this peaceful parenting. And what exactly does that mean? It
Mhm.
sounds like you don't ever punish your kids, or do I have that mixed up? They should get punished sometimes.
I mean,
We
there's
never
the
raise our voice.
ideal. There's the ideal and the reality. I mean, I will tell you, I've never punished my children since that day on the step. And they are lovely, responsible. They are more organized and disciplined than me. They're wonderful humans. I do not believe that punishing is required for effective parenting. However, I'm not here to tell anyone else that they shouldn't use tools that are effective for them or that are aligned with their values and parenting philosophy. Now, let's unpack this word punishment, because there's quite a lot that can be put into that word, right? So is physical, corporal punishment, problematic from my point of view. Yeah, because we talked about trust. And there is no way that trust gets maintained if you are causing physical pain to your child. They will not want to come to you when they mess up because they're scared. And so for me, like, goal, we just get over that as a society and decide that that is abuse.
So no
Nor,
spanking.
yeah, I mean, just any
Got
kind
it.
of physical pain. um, I think we can just put that away. We no longer live in a society where people need to be broken into submission, which is really the point of corporal punishment. Um, Other types of punishments, timeouts. Again, I'm leading with connection, with trust based parenting. And so, what I prefer that people start to play with, right, just maybe as a fun idea, is how can I use natural and logical consequences to teach my children how to behave, right? So
Mm.
instead of saying, like, let's imagine like a child hits his sister and we're like, yell at him and go put him in his room. Well, have we taught him why not to hit? Have we taught him what nice touch feels like? Have we taught him what hands can be used for? And that kind of teaching, right? The root of discipline is disciple. It means parents are the teachers, right? And so rather than saying, you may no longer be a part of this family, you need to go away from us, or you are going to lose access to something that you really love, we might play with this idea of hitting hurts, right? And I'm connected, I'm warm. What does it feel like for you when you get hit? How are ways that you might express your frustration instead? My kids still laugh. Hands are for helping, not hurting. I used to say that like 8,000 times. Now they pinch each other because they're teenagers and like to get each other's goat. I'm like, hands are for helping, not hurting, right? So I think not using punishments maintains our ability to continue to be in a trust based relationship where we can teach our children what to do.
Got it.
So it's
Okay.
a goal. It's a goal for
So
me,
let
but
me,
I'm never here to tell anybody what we
yeah.
should decide.
I were you spanked in one home with dad and
Actually, the only experiences I remember of being spanked were when my mom just completely lost her marbles and
mm,
unleashed on me. Um, I don't ever remember being spanked. What I do remember, I grew up on Long Island in the 70s and 80s. Many of my friends got the belt, got taken up to their room to get corrected. It was around me a lot, and I think it also informed that kind of like, this is kind of messed up worldview that
yeah.
I had as a kid.
Yeah, it just made me think. I had a flashback to a memory. I think my mom had a story of when she was a kid. She hid a book in her pants, so that when she got spanked, then he hurt his hand, and it made it even worse. It didn't make the situation
Oh
better.
yeah,
That was
that
for
was.
sure. So
I mean, the
we've
thing
come
that
a
just
long
like really.
ways.
We
Yeah,
have. I mean, I think
we've come a
like
long.
advocates of spanking will say things like, when done in a calm and loving manner, spanking is a very effective tool. Like, let's be honest, who's actually like,
Not
how do
calm
you
or
spank in
collected.
a calm? It's not. It's a release, right? Parents get to the point of utter and sheer frustration. That power thing comes up, and the best way to get power, make someone else cry, and the
Yeah.
parent gets a release and there's catharsis and the child acquiesces. Like, let's call a spade a spade.
So let me throw out some examples to you in real life, and I'm curious to see like how it fits in with the peaceful parenting model. So you have teenagers, they're on their phone. It seems
Mm-hmm.
like the phone is like the number one thing these days that causes a lot of these problems and is punished by taking it away or that kind of thing. Is there any
Yeah.
scenario where if the kid is doing something they shouldn't on a phone, whether it's using an app that they're not supposed to be using or any type of inappropriate thing, is
Mhm.
there, how would you go about parenting that in those scenarios?
Yeah. So a logical consequence is something that's directly related to the child's behavior. So, for example, if you had a younger child not wearing their helmet on their bike, you might remove access to the bike until they could demonstrate that they were willing to do it safely. So, same with teenagers and phones. I coached a mom whose daughter was exhibiting high risk behavior on social media. She did not want to take the phone away because she was scared of losing the relationship with her daughter. And we had to have a very hard conversation about where this behavior might lead, right? Like there are predators online. Kids can go down a very, like, yeah, we're going to take the phone away and this is for your safety. And I hear that you are mad at me and I get it. And so let's start to think about ways that you might earn the phone back. And I'm going to leave that with you to think about. So that's a very different than like, okay, the child didn't clean their room and we take their phone away.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is what I would call a contrived consequence. It has nothing to do with what is happening. So teenagers leaving food in the room, right? You may no longer have food in your room. This is a
Yeah.
hard rule. And so peaceful parenting is not permissive parenting. I would say my kids probably would say that I'm pretty strict. I think what's important is that boundaries and limits are clearly communicated, right? That
Yeah.
kids know what the rules are so that they can win the game. And that as parents who understand that they don't have fully developed brains, we're going to help build support systems for them to be able to follow through on their commitment, right? So for me, like it's my son's job, well, now he's in college, but when he was home to take out the trash to the curb every Tuesday night. And he was forgetting. Well, you know what we did? We set up a reminder. Like I didn't yell at him. I was like, what do we need to remember? I said, how about we put some reminders on your phone? He's like, oh, great idea. What's your favorite song you wanted to go with? Miles, We Are the Champions. Okay, great. Every
That'll make
Tuesday
it
night at
fun.
7, you're getting a reminder. Guess what? He stopped forgetting to take out the trash. He wasn't forgetting because he's a bad kid. He was forgetting because he's a teenager.
Yeah. So what if he didn't take out the trash for 3, 4, 5 weeks in a row after you put that in place? Would it be coming
Yeah.
up with a consequence? So I love that there's still, we're calling it a consequence. So to me, in my eyes, it's like, okay, at least there is some, like, if you are doing something that you're not supposed to be doing, there is some kind of reining it in. Because a lot of people today, it feels like the kid has the upper hand. Like that parent that you were sharing in that example is like, well, I don't want to take their phone because here's what happens. A lot of them, well, they threaten that they're going to hurt themselves, or they come up with these self-diagnosis because they can go on Google and they're smart and they're, I need a mental health day. I'm diagnosed with X, Y, and Z, and unfortunately, it's tough as the parent to be like, well, I can look into this and there are certain things, and you kind of outsmarted and checkmated me here. So in that example, I guess with your son, if it wasn't just like a thing, but it was an act of defiance, or like, no, I'm too busy playing video games, what would be the next step
Listening
in
in.
that
So, okay,
for
just
you? And again, you said
for
you
me,
don't tell other
it
parents how to
actually
parent.
it ties back to a really important foundation of parenting without punishments and consequences. All behavior is a reflection of a need and whether that need has been met or unmet. So, if I've set clear expectations and I've helped co-create support solutions with my child, and they continue to exhibit not doing the thing or continuing speaking to me in a way that causes me pain, I'm going to get super curious because something else is going on there,
Yeah.
right? Like these are, to your point, kids are so smart, right? And so if they're getting the reminder and they're still not taking out the trash, interesting. And I'm going to get super curious about what that behavior is telling me is going on with my child. And that would sound like what we call an empowered communication. So we have an empowered communication framework that is based in Marshall Rosenberg's work, nonviolent communication. Our kids don't want us to be angry at them, believe it or not, right? And so I might say something like, hey, I am feeling really angry. I'm even starting to feel some resentment build up because we've had this conversation multiple times. We came up with a solution and it's still not working. What is happening? What do you need me to know? What's going on, buddy? right?
Yeah.
So I'm not attacking the kid. I'm opening a conversation about what's happening. Maybe I haven't been following through on a commitment that I made to him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's not saying, oh, let me be defiant by not taking out the trash. It's much deeper than that. But that's resistance, right? A defense wall between two people who want to be in a close relationship. We got to break that wall down. And that will never come if we're like, you're stupid, you're irresponsible, you're rebelling, teenagers, oh, you're the worst. That wall is going to get thicker and taller and brickier. And
Yeah.
so, yeah,
No, we always say it's like there's a wall barrier between a lot of parents and their teenagers, and that's part of pushing the boundaries and the developing brain and all those things. But I really like that. It's funny because I feel like it's every, book and advice we've heard since the beginning of time, and it's communication, it turns out, is pretty important in any relationship, whether it's
that's right.
with your kids or your significant other, your family, and all those things. So
Everything.
I love that. And having it,
Yeah.
like you're saying, honest. Hey, I am angry right now. Like I
Mhm.
feel like we've talked about this. We set up these parameters of how it was going to get done and ways to aid you in that, and it's not happening. This is frustrating to me. What can we do about it? What's going on your end? Am I doing something on my end that isn't meeting your need? And
Yeah.
maybe being open to eating that sandwich again if there's
Yep.
some things that you weren't even aware of. So,
Yeah. You want a quick story about this? This is a super
oh,
vulnerable
love
story.
one. Yes.
So, I grew up as a pretty professional dancer in New York,
Oh, wow.
all combined with body image issues and eating disorders, as happens when
Yes, yes,
you're in
yes.
that world. And so during COVID, my daughter was probably around 14 and started, going through puberty and gaining weight. And I did not respond well to this. Every fear, danger, your life is no one's going to want to be around. Like my stuff was up so badly. Now, I'm an expert in this stuff and I could not see it. I was so sure I was right. She started calling me the sugar Nazi. She said I would like glare at her when she was eating. Like I'd be like, really? You're going to keep going? I was terrible,
Yeah,
terrible, like
yeah,
world's worst mother at that time. And I finally, through the help of, luckily, I have an army of parenting coaches to call on. So I did some work. I have wonderful friends who were willing to hold up a mirror and let me see that I was like really being destructive to my child. It was awful.
yeah,
And so I had to go to Charlotte, eat my sandwich, and say, I was just wrong and I'm so sorry. And she was pissed for a long time. She really had like an arm's length. She would be like so nice to all the other girls' mothers and just really hard on me. And I was just like, just gonna take it. I earned this. Like I did it. And then eventually I just got to the point where I was like, okay, like enough is enough.
yeah,
And I said to her, like, hey, we need to have a heart to heart. I noticed, I think one of her friend's moms had been over for dinner and they were kind of like making fun of me. I can't remember. It was really painful. And I was like, that dinner we just had was so painful. I know I hurt you. I feel like I've apologized. I have stopped having anything to say about your food or your body. And I never should have done that. And at some point, honey, like I need you to meet me back in the middle. And this child just cracked. I mean,
mm,
sobbing tears, like, I know I've been being so mean to you, and I didn't know how to stop, and I wanted to stop, and I've just been feeling terribly about how I've been treating you, and I don't want to be like this anymore. And we hugged and the whole thing. And it's like now we have, I mean, it was such a turning point for us. And we have the closest relationship now where it's like this kid who wouldn't even let me touch her comes and crawls into bed with me at 17 and starts doing her, 17-year-old girl. I call it the berry picking report, and then this, and then this, and then da, 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 da. And it's like those moments are priceless. But
yeah,
we have to open the doorway for real connection to happen. And if we keep saying, it's the kid, it's you, it's never going to happen. And then they're going to be 30 and not want to come to our house for Thanksgiving.
Mm. And a lot of credit to you to reach outside of your own, just being in the thick of it to get that support from people around you. And I feel like that's one of the things we were talking about yesterday is it takes a village. Remember, we all used to say it takes a village to raise a child, and it really does. And we need that sense of community and that sense of belonging. And again, that communication and being vulnerable and sharing how you're feeling. We see that a lot with parents who record videos and then we send them to their kids when they don't expect it. And the whole thing is like we want you to see not your mom not just as your mom and your dad not just as your dad, but as actual human people that love you and make so many sacrifices and want nothing but the best for you. But it's so
Yeah.
easy, and I am so guilty of this myself, of just saying, oh, this is my mom, she does everything for me. It wasn't until I was in my 20s that I realized, like, oh, she actually had like her own life and her own dreams, and she sacrificed so much for me to be able to have a shot to do any of the things that I wanted in my life. So I love that story, and I appreciate you sharing it because I think just like it's when you show that humanity and you show it's the same way with speaking. It's like you think you need to show the highlight reel, but it's really when you go and share the struggles and the bruises and the bumps. That's what people come up after and want to connect with you and can relate to. So I appreciate that so much. I
Hmm.
wanted to ask you, do you feel like kids today are misunderstood?
I mean, what generation of kids doesn't feel misunderstood? It's, of course they do. I think what's changed is we are much more aware of emotional needs and relational needs than in any generation in the past. Our kids, one of the kind of upsides of social media is that they're introduced to what toxic behavior looks like, and they're introduced to what emotional intelligence looks like, or emotional immaturity. So it we have a different bar to meet for our kids if
Yeah.
we want to truly understand them. We get to be willing to put our assumptions and our worldview aside and get so curious about theirs and not try to be right or not try to make them wrong, but just really like, what is high school like for you?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what do you feel like when you're on Instagram? Do you feel better about yourself? Like, I'm genuinely want to know. I
Yeah.
can't imagine what that must be like.
I think it requires a lot of empathy. And that's something I've had to really work on. And I'm grateful for the era that I grew up in. It was kind of before all of these things exploded. And it was simpler. You could make mistakes, and it wasn't something that was documented for the whole world to know for the rest of your life. And I've had to be like, well, why are these kids tougher? Why, literally, like you said, something on Instagram happens, they don't get enough likes or follows, and their whole world is crumbling
Gosh,
and falling apart. But the hardest thing they know is the hardest thing that they know. If that's the hardest thing that they've experienced. And so kind of imploring that empathy has been something that I've had to really take time, because my first instinct is like, toughen up, walk it off. You guys have it so easy compared to not just the
oh,
generation before you, but
every
everywhere else in the
generation.
world.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
So
I
how,
think like the beauty of being that like stable, safe harbor anchor for our children is they get to build an identity based on how we see them. And if we don't give them that, someone else is going to, right? And so the best antidote, from my perspective,
yeah.
against being so sensitive to, what someone said to you is to help our kids know who they are, right? Like
Mm.
to really like I am so like my son beats to a different drum. He's kind of he's like a kid who was always in the trees at birthday parties. He likes animals way more than humans. He has a very high
Okay.
bar of integrity. And it's been
Yeah.
challenging for him. He went to Montessori school till eighth grade, and then he went to public high school and he asked the boys at the lunch table to be more considerate. You could imagine how that went. And I
Yeah.
remember saying to him once, like he was really struggling in ninth grade. I said, honey, maybe you just want to like try to act a little bit like the other kids so that it's an easier time for you. And he's like, absolutely not. I know who I am. I like who I am, and I'm never going to pretend to be who I'm not for other people's comfort. Jesse, I was
Yeah.
like,
My hero. This kid's my hero. Yeah, yeah.
why did that happen? Because I always, this is what made me cry. I always celebrated that for him.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I said, if you want to spend the whole birthday party in the tree, buddy, go for it. You do you.
yeah, yeah. I think that is one of the most critical elements, and that's at the core of what we do is confidence and self-esteem. And like that, you
Yeah.
said, because if someone comes and attacks you, and you could say all these things about me, like 9 out of 10, they aren't going to affect me at all because, like you said, I know who I am, I know what I stand for, and I have that belief in myself. So unless it's the 1 out of 10 thing where it's like, oh, no, that's something I really suck at, and that's something I really need to work on, then it just bounces right off. And we need more kids that are like that. That's a leader. Your son right there, he is a leader. He's not a follower. He's going to march to the beat of his own drum, and that's going to be great for him. And to be honest, with the world and how it is with a lot of kids and cliques and where I'm at, a video came out the other day and a couple girls were beating each other up at school, and there was hundreds of kids holding up a phone filming it. I can guarantee that your son, this I
No.
can't guarantee it, but this is my, he would have not have been holding up a phone. He would have got
Yeah.
and actually tried to help out and done the
Yeah.
right thing. But there's a lack of family values. And
Right.
so I just think that's so powerful, and that just warmed my heart so much to hear that story about him, because that's the kind of kids that we want, that can stand on their own 2 feet, that are leaders, they can care less than they need to about what other kids think about them, and stand for doing the right thing and being their own person.
Yeah. I mean, the values, like, I think we think kids will just like figure out what values they're supposed to have. And the best gift that we can give our children is very intentional family values, creating a family ethos that is really grounded into what matters to you as a parent, right? Like, we may have different values in my family than someone else's family. But as parents, it is our number one job to instill and demonstrate and teach and live those values, because then that's who our children will be when they go out in the world. It's like if we leave a void, the void will get filled by television and movies and social media. So let's not leave a void. Let's fill them up with our connection, with our commitment, with our compassion, our empathy, our belief in them, also our willingness to call them out when they are not living up to those standards, but doing it in a way that does not demean, diminish, belittle, and really comes from wanting to understand the disconnect so that they can be successful as someone who has integrity, as someone who follows through on their commitments, as someone who is organized, as someone who's disciplined. For me, like reading, like we are a family. I want to raise you to be thinkers and readers. And
Mm,
so, that meant like everyone had a book on Thursday night in the living room, me too, and we're
yeah,
reading.
yeah. Oh, I love that. So you guys would do it one night a week, like tonight's
Yeah.
our kind of reading marathon. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm curious on this. I mentioned earlier that the phone is such an interesting thing, and as you were saying, what you just said of like we're supposed to pour in their lives so they don't have to go out and join a gang to get that support and that kind of thing. They're dealing with these different things, and it's like their innocence a lot of times is being taken at such a younger age because they just have exposure to things where
Yeah.
like, oh, if they were at home they were safe and in your protection, but they can be in their room and have literally access to everything in the history of the universe. Do you
Yeah.
have any tips for parents when it comes to parents, teens, and their phones?
Yeah. I mean, you, again, like this is the beauty of relationship, right? So bring back the family dinner, my people, and make it a phone free
Yeah.
zone, right? Like we have device free dinners whenever I'm home, my kids are home, because then we can get curious, right? Like, hey, what are you seeing? What did you see that was inspiring? What did you see that felt uncomfortable? Um, there's a way that as parents, if we make ourselves more interesting than the devices, our children will want to be with us, right? So crazy dance parties in the kitchen, being interested in their world, getting out of the house. Parenting is hard, and I know that this sounds like more work, but the way that they're going to let us know what's happening in their world is for us to have create the space and the time for them to do that. And then we can be the voice of moderation, of reason, right? Like, say to your daughter, like, maybe she had a friend who was really upset. How would you respond in that situation? What might you do to get support, right? Like, we're just their teacher.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
love it. I love it, man. This is amazing. I appreciate this so much. And I think this is
My
going to have a huge
pleasure.
impact on our listeners. Where's the best place that they should go and check out everything that you have going on? Is it the website? Is it the Institute? Can you kind of point us in that direction? And then I have one final question for you.
Yes. There's a tremendous amount of resources at our website, giinstituteforparenting.com. My book is available on Amazon, Audible, The Peaceful Parenting Revolution. So I would start there.
Perfect. Yay. And you work with the parents and not directly with the teens, or do you also work with teens and parents?
We are parent centric 100%. There
Okay.
is hardly anything in our entire curriculum about children's, well, that's not true because we teach child development, but our focus really is parent centric because of everything that we've talked about today.
Well, I 100% agree with your philosophy that it starts with the parent and leading by example. So that's such a beautiful thing, and I think what you're doing is so great. I want to know. So my final question: if you were going to go back and give yourself one piece of advice, you're starting your parenting journey. Maybe they're just turning. The oldest one's just turning a teenager. What would be that one piece of advice that you would give yourself?
As much as possible, stay out of their way. It's like when we have to parent, it's like we want to keep the cup full. And the more kids are given independence, autonomy, free will, the ability to make choices, that we don't henpeck them and belittle them, then when we do have to be more like focused in on moderating behavior or making adjustments, we're not coming from an empty cup. And so it's like kids are actually amazing at figuring things out, but we've got to be willing to give them the space for them to do that.
So building resilience and building some grit from experiencing it. I love it. This has been amazing. Thank you so much. And we're going to have
Thanks
to
for
do
having
more
me,
of these in the
Jesse.
future.